Welcome to the Gnostic Informant. I'm Jesus, the Logos incarnate, and you are about to attain true Gnosis.
In the Exodus account, you have the entire nation of Egypt getting punished and screwed over by God. You would think if you had actual God appearing and doing all these crazy things through pillars of fire and clouds and plagues, right? You would think some of the Egyptians would probably go, oh, do you know what? I think this God might exist. In the case of the Pharaoh, God sends these plagues to punish not the Pharaoh, but the entirety of Egypt on behalf of what Pharaoh said when Pharaoh's heart was itself hardened by God. Satan is doing God's bidding, right? God is allowing Satan to go about doing whatever Satan does, and God is effectively sanctioning what he does. If God wills for Satan not to do something, then God can stop. So therefore, anything that Satan does, like rape, genocide, placing fossils where evolutionary scientists would predict them to be, you know, everything that Satan supposedly does is actually the will of God.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true Gnosis. Today I'm joined for the trilogy now, Jonathan M.S. Pearce, and we're going to be talking about prayer. This is a interesting topic, and we're also going to talk a little bit about Satan. So the Satan thing's going to sort of be a little bit adding to what we talked about last week, but yeah, they sort of go. Well,
perhaps we'll start with Satan because that carries on. That's a segue from last week, and then we'll move on to prayer if that's all right with you.
Yeah, perfect.
So yes, I think it said last week that Satan, if you believe in this triadic God, this what I call omni-God, which is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent, right? All knowing, all powerful, all loving, and has full divine foreknowledge. Everything just seems to not make a lot of sense in the context of understanding God like that, because you have to explain all suffering from a stub toe to a tsunami to from cancer to a burning fawn in a forest fire, right? You have to explain every unit of suffering in light of the fact that God is all loving and all powerful and all knowing. So how does that work? And there are all sorts of different sort of iterations of this. So suffering can also be God being absent, divine hiddenness. If God, you know, if you're suffering as a Christian and God's not there for you and not defending you, if you're a martyr and you're just about to die for God and God's nowhere to be seen, then that is a form of suffering. And in fact, it's even more acute because you are dying for God and yet God is not there. So there are all sorts of problem of evil arguments and arguments to do with God's omni attributes. But Satan, if Satan exists, if you're a Christian literalist or a Muslim who believes in that Satan properly exists, then and you believe that God is all powerful, then you also believe necessarily that God is able to completely destroy Satan instantaneously with an abstract click of the fingers, right?
Right.
So if Satan still exists, Satan is doing God's bidding, right? God is allowing Satan to go about doing whatever Satan does, and God is effectively sanctioning what he does, or in fact, arguably willing what he does. Because if God wills for Satan not to do something, then God can stop Satan doing it, right?
Right.
And so therefore, everything that Satan does, if Satan is placing those fossils, if you're a young earth creationist and think Satan's placing those fossils to fool humanity, that's not Satan doing that, that's God doing it. God's just using Satan as a vehicle in which he can fulfill his desires. So therefore, anything that Satan does, whether it's to do with like rape, genocide, placing fossils where you know evolutionary scientists would predict them to be, you know, everything that Satan supposedly does is actually the will of God. And so therefore, stop blaming Satan and start blaming God.
There's actually a meme out there I'm showing on the screen right now as I'm speaking. It shows the death count of Satan and God, and there's like millions or billions of deaths that God was behind, and like maybe like 7 to 10 from Satan.
Yeah.
And it's like,
yeah.
but
well, when you've got God like killing the entirety of humanity and all the animals on Earth, apart from like 2 of each or 7 of each, apart from 8 people, then right, the body count is already pretty huge.
Yeah, and it's like, to add to what you just said, you got this character Satan, who is supposedly one of the angels, right? Depending on which account you're looking at.
Yeah,
The,
tradition and habit.
yeah, the Gnostic view is actually lines up with the Arab, or I almost said Arabic, the Islamic view, whereas they actually have a narrative where Adam is created, and Adam's presented in front of all the angels, and Satan, or in some versions it's it's a different name. It's like Al or Hazazel or something like that. Azazel. So, but the narratives are exactly the same. They just switch the name around. So then this Azazel Satan character, he looks at Adam and says, "I will not." Well, our God goes, "I want you all to bow to my creation." So all the angels bow and do what he said. Of course, they do what God said. But then Satan and his minions and his homeboys are like, "Hell nah, dude. We're not bowing to that thing. That's mortal. He ain't nothing. I'm not bowing to him." And then he gets cast out of heaven for that. So then you got to think, okay, here's Satan. He has eternity to live under this beautiful heaven, right? He can do whatever he wants, and he's got it made. And he just because he wants to not bow to Adam, he gets cast down to earth for eternity and put in chains and all. Like, what kind of logic is that? Then you got there's a whole nother thing where it's like, okay, so God couldn't kill him right there. He had to send him down to heaven to rule the earth. Yeah. And then he wants him to rule the earth. He blames him for everything that happens that's wrong. It's also all evil comes from Satan. That's part of the Bible, right? So it's like, okay, you knowingly set this evil into the earth, and then you say, okay, because of Adam's sin, there's evil. But which one is it? You say Satan's the author of all evil, yeah. And then you say, well, sin entered the earth through Adam's sin. Which one is it?
But then it goes back to the serpent, and then was the serpent Satan, and then these different. But then at that time you had God walking around the Garden of Eden and not even knowing where Adam was. So you've got this real anthropomorphic understanding of what God was, and of course it's overtly mythological. And you're not going to have a talking serpent, and you're not going to have the Adam and Eve as the first man and woman. You know, this is obvious mythology. It's broadly, taken from, misappropriated from other sources. But if you literally believe that, you've got some issues anyway. But right. If you literally believe that, then you have to understand that anything that kind of literal Satan does is at the behest of God, is sanctioned by God. Right. And as you mentioned, this idea that Satan would reject, knowing that God is all powerful, knowing that God is omni-God, and actually living with omni-God. Do you know what? It's not like us doubting God down on earth. I mean, this is supposedly an angel in heaven having the full access to God's love and the paradise that you talk about. Supposedly, to reject that is clearly nonsensical. And
yeah, it's like saying you have two options. Open this box and you get $1 billion and you live forever. And open that box and a snake's going to come out and bite your head off. Which one are you going to pick? There's almost no difference, because in the sense where he knows it's all real, he knows he has this eternal realm, but he chooses to be literally the opposing figure of everything. He chooses to be that. Would anyone choose to be that in the right mind? No. And then so then we'll take Job, for example. Job, in the book of Job, you got Satan and God are sort of like homies. They're like, hey, what's up, man? Where you been at, bro? Oh, I've been on the earth just going to and fro, just doing my thing down there. Oh yeah, my boy Job down there. Yeah, he's chilling, right? He's cool. Nah, fuck that dude. I don't like that dude. And then so then he's like, obviously it's not how it's written, but I'm just fucking around. So then he goes, okay, fine, let's make a deal. All right, put 50 on it. All right, let's see if we can trip him up real quick. All right, let's go down there. So then he sends him down there to wreak havoc on his land, kill his family, do all this crazy shit, put sores on his face, and then he never curses God. He says, curse my birth and whatever. So then Satan comes down and has this big dialogue. It's actually a really good written book. I actually enjoyed that book.
But that's the point, is that it's a well-written book, but it has those sorts of things are theological wranglings of the writers, right? And they're obviously so. Like, if I was a Christian, was reading the Bible, Ecclesiastes and all the book of Job, as I might say in Britain, but you know, you read these books and you think, right, these are the authors wrangling with these big ideas, and this is how they present their arguments and how they present their understanding of theology and the problem of evil and this and that and these kind of difficult notions. But they aren't to be read literally. But then, of course, so many Christians in the world do read them literally. Oh, like, this happened, it's in the Bible, it happened. That kind of Christian literalism is wrong, but it also makes no sense of things like Satan, as we're talking about. You know, if you think Satan literally exists like that, then you have to explain it in terms of omni-God. Whereas when Christianity started liberalizing in the 18th century, and from then on, you started getting this understanding that Satan didn't really work in those contexts, and therefore it's a symbolic entity that can be used to explain evil and almost a representation of human evil and our fallen natures.
Yeah, and this might be the last thing I want to say. Maybe not, but the biggest thing I think that when you take a step back and look at how this makes no sense is that as a punishment for Satan, he gets his own realm. Basically, he gets almost equal power to God. He gets his own realm where he can have souls for eternity. He can have your soul, and you can go to his realm, and you can't get out. And Satan has full dominion over that realm. Why is that a punishment? That sounds like sweet.
It's almost like this is Christians looking at yin yang and saying there's this equal, you know, good and bad in the world, and that the two entities are on an even footing. And of course, that's clearly not the case, or can't be the case.
Heresy. That's Gnosticism too, but that's heresy.
Yeah. And so, but I think that's how people see it, and because it's all part of our cultural baggage that we bring to things like reading the Bible and understanding theology. Is like, well, you've watched Star Wars, you've watched these films, you've read these books, and everything is this tussle between good and evil, as if they are equal forces, and they're trying to win over your conscience and your soul and all of this stuff. And of course, that's not really how reality works, and it certainly wouldn't be how an omnipotent God would work. So. You know, at the end of the day, Satan didn't design cancer and malaria and plate tectonics. You know, Satan didn't do that. God did that. Right. So, you know, when your auntie dies of cancer, or when 230,000 people die in a tsunami, you know, that ain't Satan. Satan didn't design the world.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because theists are almost forced into that line of thinking, because, like, take the concept of maktub in Islam. Maktub means destiny, or, you know, God's will, right? So when you, like, from a perspective of ISIS, they're you know, let's say there's like a group of ISIS people living in Afghanistan or Syria or something, and their living conditions are just terrible. They don't have any real power over the world. They're being chased from point A to point B constantly by NATO. And so they have to sit there, and if they have Allah to have their back, and they think this, they have to tell themselves, well, we got to remember Satan has power over these people. Satan's leading them over us. Right now, we have to beat Satan. It's like, how far do you have to go to actually say, is Satan stronger than your God? Because look at you right now.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because actually what happens with all problem of evil arguments, so just to recap on the problem of evil, if God is all-powerful, God can do something about suffering and evil on earth. If he's all-knowing, he knows what to do about it. And if he's all-caring and all-loving, he cares enough to do something, to want to do something about it. So why is there evil and suffering on the earth? Right. And the problem for Christians and Muslims is that really, if everything is contingent upon God, right, and God has created everything as a necessary being, he exists in all possible worlds, and he creates this world, right? So we're all contingent upon God. Therefore, everything in the world is designed and created and is contingent upon God, especially if God had divine foreknowledge and knew in advance and created anyway. And that's a real problem for Christians, because they have to say, well, this evil, this tsunami happened because God designed it that way. Well, that's a real problem. So what they do is they invent theodicies. And theodicies are things like, well, that happened because of original sin, and that happened with all soul making theodicy or free will. There has, so they invent these things to get God off the hook. But it's either humans at the source of the evil, right? So it's our fault. So because it can't be God, it has to be some other entity's fault, right? So
Right.
it's either humans' fault or it's Satan's fault. Right, so Satan takes on humans in these kind of theodicies where we're like, well, how can evil exist on Earth? Well, it's Satan. Okay, that's fine. It's not God. Okay, it's not God. It's fine. It's Satan. Right, I get it. It's not God. It's humans. Okay, I get it. And the real problem comes when you come to things like animal suffering and what are called natural evils. So you have earthquakes, malaria, all these kind of things where you say, well, that can't be because of free will. That can't be because of original sin, really. That can't be because of soul building theodicy, like a fawn dying. This is the philosopher William Rose said, if a fawn dies over a 3-day period in a forest fire and its burning husk of a body takes 3 tortured days to die and no one knows about it, right? But it still happens, then that's got nothing to do with humans, and that's really got nothing to do with Satan. So really, what does this look like? Either God isn't omnibenevolent or God doesn't exist.
Yeah, and so it's funny because Lawrence Cross is actually coming on my channel next week. This end of this week, he was debating William and Craig, and he said something brilliant. He said, "Farmers used to pray for rain. Now they don't. Now they go see a geologist, which is a good thing." And it's like, and another thing I want to add to what you said is like, when you look at nature, you see a wolf chasing down a elk and eating its face off. And you got that's a real sobering reminder that this whole entire energy needs more energy.
Yeah.
So it has to eat other energy
to
keep going. That's not a creation. That's evolution.
So I give a public talk called God on Trial, where I put God on trial and I present 5 philosophical arguments against the existence of omnigod, right? And in fact, what you're talking about is the argument I call it's the argument about photosynthesis and about carnivorousness, right? And so, and I've in fact I'm writing in a present book I'm writing now. So if God can define how evolution plays out, right, or designs everything or whatever, God is responsible for creation. Why is it that half of the animals in the animal kingdom require the death of other animals to survive? Right, so you start thinking, well, that's really pretty evil. And I watched a video of a bunch of lions eating a baby water buffalo and pulling it limb from limb while it was alive. And I made myself watch it to really understand the problem of evil in this natural context, and saying, right, so if I was God, well, straight away I'd be thinking, okay, either you don't need energy. So that's really interesting you made that point, because this is a really interesting point. Either you don't need energy to survive, you can just merely survive without an energy. You can conceptually imagine a world where that could be created, so God should be able to do that. Or you make all animals in the animal kingdom photosynthesize really effectively, so that we don't need to go about killing other animals. We literally exist through energy generated from the sun or from oxygen or whatever. We can come up with these ideas. Why can't God?
Simple ideas.
Yeah, they're not hard.
You didn't just think of some crazy idea like that. Could, you're a perfect omnipotent God that has all the wisdom. It says in the Bible, all wisdom comes from God, right? Okay, so this perfectly wise, all-knowing, all-knowledgeable creator can't figure out how to create a world with beings, animals and humans alike, where they have to eat each other to live.
Yeah,
that's what you decided to do, was make a world where you eat each other to live, and if you eat one that has a disease, you die from that. So you don't even know if you're gonna. Sometimes eating the other animal can cause your death. So this is totally flawed.
Yeah, this is called the Darwinian problem of evil, right? And the strength of this argument is that it takes it all away from humanity. Okay, it's all nothing to do with original sin, nothing, like I said, free will and all these stuff, and you still have to explain how all this evil and pain and suffering can exist.
They say Satan.
But then, of course, Satan, in an omnipotent God's reality, Satan is just doing what God is bidding. And God designed evolution. It is a real struggle to explain this. It's a difficult thing. Of course, theists go to something called the logical problem of evil, where they say, well, there might be an idea, we just don't know it. Skeptical theism. God moves in mysterious ways, and that's what they do. And they go, that's my get out of jail free card. There could be a reason. Yeah, but what is the reason? There could be one.
Sure, my bad. I didn't mean to cut you off. Are you finished?
Sorry, go. No, I'm done.
So, you know what? I just popped in my head this thought. So, when Adam and Eve sin and they get punished, they say from now on you have to work the sweat off your brow to get and you have to eat food to live. Like they're trying to explain away the whole like why we have to eat food to live, right?
This is called etiology. So in a lot of holy books, you get a lot of stories that are etiological, which means that they are there to explain how things happen and why things happen, why that mountain is there, why this looks like that. So Sodom and Gomorrah's pillar of salt is arguably an explanation of why the Dead Sea is so salty, because of this pillar of salt. So it's an etiological story. But anyway, carry on.
No, and that's a good point, because there's actually parts of the world where in the Middle East where it looks like there might have been hit by some sort of asteroid or meteor or something, and so they probably came along and said, well, look at this area, God must have smoked this area, and they write it in their Bible. Then you got this pillar of salt. I'm not kidding you. I don't know if you've heard of this. There's a pillar of salt in Israel right now. There's pictures I'm showing the picture right now as we speak. As you can see, this is a pillar that they call Lot's wife. I'm not joking. That you can actually go and look at it and say, well, there's Lot's wife right there, just chilling as a pillar of salt. It's obviously not, but it actually has. It's funny because the shape of the pillar sort of has like a human figure a little bit. Not really. It's just a. I mean, like,
but yeah,
Michael Shermer always talks about this, how we like to look for patterns and everything. Yeah. Like a toast has a picture of Jesus on it. It doesn't really have a picture of Jesus on it, but we make ourselves think that, right? Well, this is one of those examples of that. So Adam and Eve get condemned into this, like, okay, you have to work the sweat off your brow. Okay, but why do animals have to do that? Because if you look in nature, a wolf has to go out and hunt. Animals have to go out and find, a bird has to go and find its prey. Why do they have to? What did they do wrong? Did they sin too? Because that doesn't make any sense.
And that's when Christians have to go, oh, this is a problem. Yeah, I do get that. So therefore, animals, they used to be all herbivorous, and now they're carnivores because of the original sin. So it's like animals are getting punished for the decision of Adam and Eve.
So then that opens up the door to saying, so that means animals have souls then? Are they, if they're punished, if their souls are punished the same way Adam and Eve's souls are punished and doomed to hell unless they repent, are they all going to hell, or can an animal repent and go to heaven? Because that you can't get away without saying both are the same thing.
Yeah, so it is a real problem. I mean, talking about etiology, I mean, you go to Ayers Rock or Uluru in Australia, and the Aboriginal Australians will have mythological stories as to why that exists. That's what they do. So it's no wonder there should be such stories in the Bible to explain things around. It's what humans do.
So, which brings us to the next point, because without prayer, you really can't get saved. You have to pray and get on your knees. According to the Christian faith, I mean, the Jewish faith is a little bit different, but across the board, universally throughout religions, there's prayer. This is the one, and then even the Hindus go like this when they pray.
Yeah.
So there's some.
So the question is, why? What is the point of prayer? And of course, there are lots of different types of prayer. So you can pray in order to worship and praise. You can pray in order to give thanks. You can pray for supplication, to ask for things, to bring things about. You can pray for intercession on behalf of other people. So all these different ideas of prayer. So liberal or not necessarily liberal, many Christians will say, no, it's not all about asking for stuff. It is about, exercising your spiritual muscles in the same way that you might exercise in order to do a 5K marathon or something like that. It's like, okay, maybe, but therefore it's all about your own. You might as well meditate or do this or that. So if you're really having a conversation with God where you're asking God to change the state of affairs, so if you're asking for something to happen or asking to be given something, of course this is pointless, because God, again, with divine foreknowledge and an omni-God, already knows everything that's going to come to pass. And so if you're saying, hang on, God, can you do this? It's not as if God's going to go, oh, that's a great idea. yeah, let's do that. I never thought about that. You small little man on earth just thought about this brilliant thing that I'd never thought about. So I'm going to change the entirety of existence in order to fit in your request. That's never going to happen. So therefore, don't bother asking. It's just a pointless thing, that kind of prayer in view of omni-God. And one thing you've got to remember about God is that God cannot be contrary to his own predictions. So if God is to be infallible and to say that, do you know what, Neil, at 9:15 on Tuesday morning, next Tuesday morning, you are going to make a cup of tea at exactly that time. When it gets to 9:15 next Tuesday morning, nothing else can happen other than you having that cup of tea. As in, you have to make that cup of tea, because if that doesn't happen, then God's own prediction of the future back this week will have been incorrect. And God cannot be incorrect. He is infallible. So God cannot act contrary to his own predictions. So everything, if God knows everything that will come about at the beginning of time, everything necessarily has to come about from that beginning of time onwards, and there is no changing. So the whole Nineveh, God changes his mind, just can't have happened. Or if it did happen, it means God is not infallible.
That is such a good way of putting it, because and we talked about this before, is like free will versus God's determination. So when you're praying, now I'm praying, right? I'm praying for all these good things to happen. I'm praying because, you know, the Bible wants Israel to succeed. So I'm praying for Israel. Well, isn't that sort of a give me? Isn't that sort of a given concept? That shouldn't God, what is a prayer going to do if God already knows he needs to do this? Like, hey God, you're behind on this, dude. I'm just reminding you, hey, it's Wednesday.
And it shouldn't be. So sometimes you know, it's to show God how you feel about something, or how God already knows inside your heart. You don't need to show any kind of. I don't even really need to praise God, because God should be able to see inside me to understand how much I appreciate God. Right. So I don't even. What is praise other than to make God feel better? Why would God, creating everything, just it appears that God is creating stuff so that people can just worship him? I mean, how egotistical can you get, and narcissistic? It's like Trump in charge of reality, where he's just demanding everyone is just giving him the love that he deserves.
No wonder why Christians love Trump so much. He sort of is like the
ultimate narcissist.
Wow. Is he the incarnation of God? No, but seriously though, because the reason, and I'm joking obviously, but the reason why I'm saying that is because think about it. All he cares about, he doesn't care what you do. He doesn't care. I'm talking about in a Christian sense right now, because I know in Islam it sort of is about works, sort of, but in Christianity it's not about works. It's all about your faith. Well, it
depends. Some Christians will argue otherwise, but yeah.
No, that's true, and even in the Bible, the Book of James says that. But the majority of Christians agree on this concept of all you got to do to get saved is get on your knees and tell the Lord and Savior that you're accepted. He gave his life on the cross. All right, so you do that, right? So what I'm getting at is this: if he's omnipresent, that word, we know that word's omnipresent. Yeah. So do you have to actually do that? Or if he's omnipresent, then he knows what you're thinking, he knows what you're feeling. And then can you fake it? Can you say, well, I really wish heaven's real? And, it sounds like a crazy story. Doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to get on my knees. And Christians will argue that the miracle happens that right then and there. Like, even if you have a little bit of a doubt, and they say in the parable of the mustard seed that Jesus says that one small mustard seed grows a whole vineyard. Okay, so why am I here on Gnostic Informant talking against this concept when I've done this before? Why was the miracle working for me? Why does the miracle only work for certain people? So then you get into predetermination, full preterism. You just were the chosen one.
Yeah. So the elect and the reprobates and it's all a bit bizarre. I mean, in some ways, I think Calvinism, for example, is more coherent than other forms of Christianity, because it makes sense of so much. It makes sense of God's foreknowledge. It makes sense of this. It makes sense of that. But it doesn't make sense of quite a lot of the Bible, unless you kind of warp and change the Bible. But then non-Calvinism also doesn't make sense of a lot of the Bible, because, of course, I think nothing makes sense of the Bible. I don't think there's any form of God that's coherent with the Bible, or really, I don't think there's any form of God that is particularly coherent at all. I mean, it's why I don't believe in God. So, when you start introducing these omni characteristics, you just get yourself in trouble. And these are just more examples of how that might happen. And are you waiting? Why should I have to do a certain thing when you can already see in my heart and know my feelings in order to unlock like the Holy Spirit? I'm just going through this kind of ritualistic thing where you're saying you can only unlock, if you're playing the one-armed bandits, you can only unlock the prize if you get 3 cherries in a row or something. Like I have to get this certain scenario where I unlock the Holy Spirit, and then suddenly thank you very much or whatever. It's crazy. I mean, I was looking online for some quotes about prayer, and Muslims. This is a Muslim said, "We as Muslims pray because God has that right over us, that he deserves our prayer due to who God is inherently. Being the creator of all that exists deserves my worship as one that is part of that creation." Do you think that's a bit weird?
It is, and they part of Sharia law is you got to pray 5 times a day, and you got to point yourself towards Mecca, which is really even weird stranger because that's not even in the Quran.
It's ritualistic nonsense. Yes. And, when you start sort of seeing the Hadith and these other writings as part of the Islamic jurisprudence, and you're like, well, actually, okay, the Quran was the inerrant word of God in Arabic, but are the Hadith that strong? I mean, you start to get a bit of interpretative wriggle room there. But I mean, yeah, the whole religion is bonkers.
And what happens if you prayed towards the other way? Is that equal? Is that as bad as not praying? Is it a little bit better than praying? Are you in the middle now? Like this whole ritualistic way of praying is so nonsense to me. The church I used to go to, they did this weird thing every day in the beginning before church started. Everybody would go to the front of the church room and would get on their knees and they would pray out loud. I'm not joking. The whole room would be all mumbling. Blah, 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 blah. You couldn't hear over. You couldn't even hear yourself think because everyone's, oh God, please let Trump win this election. Oh, and it's like, why? Why is that? And it even goes against their own scripture.
Yeah, so it's all about the Pharisee, the gospel story about doing it quietly on your own, and it's all about this internal feeling and belief and communication rather than what I would see as virtue signaling. I always find it funny how the right wing. I'm a liberal lefty, right? But and you get accused of virtue signaling. It's like, actually, the right virtue signal huge amount, but they just don't see it as virtue signaling. So something like praying out loud, something like praying out loud and something like that is trying to tell other people how good you are. It's exactly what Jesus said not to do. And I've got people on my blog who I've got. Is it the Marines that say Semper Fi? And I've got someone that says that at the end of every single comment he makes, as if to say, why are you saying that? Don't have a go at us for virtue signaling when you are trying to tell me after every single comment on my blog that you are you're a veteran of the Marines. I mean, that's wonderful. Well done. Great service and all that kind of stuff. But Don't go around shouting about it all the time as if that is virtue signaling. So it's a funny thing. And, prayer, you shouldn't really need to pray at all, let alone tell everyone about the fact that you're praying, because God should be able to read your mind and know exactly what your wants and desires are. So therefore, I suppose the only coherent understanding of prayer is it's in some way a part of your journey into some kind of spiritual growth, into a better understanding you and your relationship with God or something like that.
Yeah, and I would even argue that's the same case for people posting on Facebook, prayers on Facebook. It's like,
are
you praying to us? Yeah, are you praying to us as your Facebook friends right now? Because I'm the only one that can see that right now. Okay, so like you made a public message. I can see the little world symbol right there. You want everyone to see this. You're not praying. You're just telling us that you're praying.
Yeah.
There you go. That's a prime example.
Yeah. So, and then when you start looking at these, so prayer doesn't really make sense apart from in a very kind of spiritualistic kind of manner. But then you can start looking at the effect of prayer. And of course, not of course, but there have been quite a bit of research on prayer, although not as much, considering that I think is that the Washington Post in one article said prayer is the most common complement to mainstream medicine, far outpacing acupuncture, herbs, vitamins, and other alternative remedies. So in fact, prayer is literally the most common alternative medicine in a sense, right? That in humanity. So many people do it, and so therefore you'd think it would have been measured an awful lot more, but it's not measured particularly because it's quite difficult to measure, but it's also like it's a bit controversial. Scientists want to maybe step away from that kind of thing, but the results have been really contradictory. I mean, one of the biggest ones for praying for people with heart surgery has actually showed that the people who knew that they were prayed for had a higher mortality rate, so they died more often. So, you know, kind of like it didn't really come up with the goods that people wanted it to. But there are some have shown some advantages of prayer, others have shown negative results, and so therefore the end result is it's a bit all over the place, as you would expect with something that is basically has no effect.
You know, I was thinking because have you ever heard of what is it called, where people actually tell themselves that they're going to have something and then it comes to them? It's
placebo.
Like, yeah, placebo. I guess it's called placebo. But there's actually like a whole movement behind it. And there's a book written about it, like The Secret Key or something like that, where they say that if you tell yourself that you're going to make $1 million, you're going to have it. Yeah. So I can't think of the name of it. Whatever. It's not a big deal. So that's what it's called. And so they're basically, and that makes me think of prayer too, because I'm going to make a case for prayer, how it actually could work right now. Yeah. All right, hear me out. Now, let's say I'm praying that I want to do better at my job or something. I'm performing like shit, right? And I'm about to get fired if I don't start meeting my quota. So I get down and I pray. I say, dear God, help me get my quota up. I got to do better at work. Help me do this, right? Now, I just did something to myself. I made a pact with myself to go to work and try harder because I put it out there to God, right? And I'm telling myself that this is going to be God that's going to help me. But really what I'm doing is I'm actually lighting a fire under my own ass to go to work. So then there's your case for prayer working right there.
Yeah, so that's a placebo effect, and that's basically how homeopathy works, if it ever works, which is homeopathy doesn't work because water doesn't have memory. Otherwise, it'd have memory of piss and shit and stuff, which water, it's very selective memories. But homeopathy believes that, you know, you distill 1,000 times and this particular ingredient, the water has a memory of it, and then you take it as a medicine, and oh, look, it does nothing. Although for some people it does work, but it only works on account of how the placebo effect works, which is to say that I really believe this is happening, mind over matter. It gives me a strong sense of well-being. I'm psychologically, I feel in control, and I feel like I'm doing the right thing. So I'm actually makes me healthier in mind and therefore healthier in body, and it can have an effect in that context. But it doesn't work as medicine in and of itself. Well, prayer doesn't work in and of itself, as you are not communicating with a God, because, you know, stop the press, God doesn't exist. But what does happen is that you are making yourself feel better about yourself. You're making yourself feel like someone is watching over you and having your back. And so that gives you a confidence, that gives you an impetus, and you end up doing better. So yes, prayer can work in that way, of course, in the same way that any kind of psychological CBT or meditation or whatever things that you can do, whatever you can do to help inform your mental well-being can affect your performance in whatever.
I think that's what's so appealing to Buddhism right now in the West, where you're getting this new wave of Buddhism going through the West. I think that's what it is, because there's something tangible when you sit down and you kind of meditate, and something tangible there. Even Sam Harris says he does it. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I'm not one of those. I don't do it, so I don't really know much about it. But to make the case for praying for things that don't necessarily you can't have control over, well, that's just a coin flip, because let's say I'm praying for the Bills to win the Super Bowl or just to win on Sunday or something, and it happens. Well, I could say, look, my prayer was answered. But it's like, okay, you had a 50% chance that they're going to win or lose. So
And,
then
and
you got,
what happens there is you also have the sample effect. So this is when you do tests on prayers and on prayer, and you say, oh look, it's actually worked quite a lot of times. Actually, people end up counting the hits and ignoring the misses.
right.
So it might be that you've forgotten this the 89% of the time that prayer hasn't worked, or probably the
89%, probably
you know,
higher.
yeah, whatever. But so it's fraught with issue, right? But of course, when you're praying for the Bills, someone else is praying for the Cowboys or whatever, and who does God choose? You know,
That's actually what was addressed in the Iliad by Homer, and right in the one of the first books, second or third book, the War of Troy. You got the Achaeans and the Trojans, and they're at war, and they're on both sides of the battleground. They're, hail Zeus! Oh, hail Zeus! Help us win! And then and it cuts to the scene where it's Zeus and Hera up in heaven. They're like, all right, well, this guy's pretty righteous. He's a pretty good guy. And so is he. What should we do? We're in a predicament here. We got to figure out. We got to choose one side here. And then, so that, which brings us to paganism. You got these different gods that do different things. So,
but it's much more understandable that gods would get involved in human affairs and be really, because they are like just superhumans. They are just people, basically, that occasionally come down to earth and do stuff, or they get their kind of representatives to do stuff in a way that's really human. And they're literally up there in Olympus going, whoa, should we? And they're having a debate because they're not omnipotent, they're not omniscient, and they're not omnibenevolent. In fact, some of the gods can be pretty bastardy. And so therefore, those kind of pagan, it's no wonder that appears in the Homeric epics.
Well, there's actually a YouTuber named Ocean Keltoy who I've been trying to get a hold of him to get him on here. He just does not respond to me. I don't know, maybe he doesn't like me, whatever. Anyways, he makes some really good points for paganism. Not that I would do it or anything, but he's very interesting the way he puts it. It's like, so you got these different gods that do different things. Poseidon is the god of the sea. Whatever. Dionysus is the god of madness and parties and frenzies. So let's say you're going on a cruise, right? And you pray to Poseidon because you want the sea to be taken care of and whatever. You go to a party, well, you pray to Dionysus to bring out the party animal in you, right? And the reason why this is actually, to me, the only reason why he's making sense to me is because what he's basically saying is, for each situation that I'm in, I need to dig into myself, right? Even though you're looking outward as you're praying upward, but really you're digging into yourself and saying, the Dionysus inside of me, make me the life of this party so I can meet a bunch of people and have a good time. And that might be the one thing that helps you actually do it. Otherwise, probably might not be able to do that. So in the sense that he makes sense, it's sort of an artistic thing, I would say.
So I suppose it can go either way. You can either be the sort of person who prays for these things to take place, and that actually there's some kind of feedback loop whereby it increases your sense of confidence, and you end up doing that. Or you can be the sort of person that prays and asks for these things, but then expect it to be handed to you on a plate, and it doesn't happen, and then you're like, so it depends who you are as a person and what kind of believer you are. But either way, when it comes back to prayer for your Abrahamic faith, it makes even less sense because
Right.
you're not going to inform change or on the God that you're praying to. In the time of Zeus and Poseidon, these are, as I say, these are very humanoid kind of gods who are very fickle and will change their mind on a whim. So you praying to them, and the idea is they really want that praise, and they over and above the other gods, and it's all a bit of a competition, and therefore it's a very interesting like pantheon of gods and a very interesting divine scenario. Makes for cool stories, but it's
and then so if you're looking at from the Bible perspective, right? Say the Bible is 100% true, everything in there is true. Well, then you have to understand that there's verses in there, the Old Testament and the New Testament, where God can actually change the hearts of people. So that makes you wonder, if he can change anyone's heart at any time, First of all, then you're like, okay, do we really have free will? And second of all, why isn't all of our hearts changed to just want to worship him all the time? If that's what he really wants, then why doesn't he just do that?
Well, every time that God interferes in human affairs in the Bible is in some way a constraint on human free will. I mean, I don't believe in libertarian free will, so it's all moot. The point's moot for me. But every time God interferes, he's saying, you know how you've decided how things are going to go and how they have gone. Well, I'm going to change that slightly by getting involved myself. So he's just every interference or intervention is constraining free will. But then in the case of the Pharaoh, God changes his mind so that Moses says, will you let my people go? And Pharaoh goes, oh, I'm going to think about this. God hardens his heart and he goes, no. And then God sends these plagues to punish not the Pharaoh, but the entirety of Egypt on behalf of what Pharaoh said when Pharaoh's heart was itself hardened by God. I mean, it's the most insanely morally abhorrent story. So the problem is people get normalized to stories, right? So you hear them over and over and over from the age of zip to the age of 80 or whatever. You hear these every Sunday when you go to church, when you read the Bible, and they just become normalized. And you don't think of them objectively for actually what they're worth, which is in the case of the Exodus, is a morally abhorrent story where God tortures and kills a huge amount of Egyptian people, including children, like newborn children, and animals, and he pollutes rivers, and he murders an entire army because Pharaoh said no, and God hardened his heart so that he said no. I mean, the whole thing is just disgrace. And yet people go, it's a great story about escaping from bondage. You know,
well, to add to what you just said, and this even has to do with exactly what you just said, is that God does all these miracles. These people literally just saw the Red Sea get split in half.
Yeah.
Okay. As soon as you see that miracle, I don't care who you are, the rest of your life, you're going to say, okay, there's a God. I'm going to do whatever he tells me to do. Right. So literally 5 pages later, they're in the desert. And Moses goes up and says, I'm going to go and get these commandments. Wait right here, y'all. Chill right here. Don't do anything stupid. I'll be right back. He goes up there. What do? They pull out a golden calf and start praying this golden calf. What? What the hell is going on?
Yeah.
Moses comes down. It gets even crazier. Moses comes down. He sees this. He throws the commandments on the ground. And what does God do? He kills every single one of them. Kids, children, women, does not care, with fiery serpents he sends from heaven to kill them because they bowed in front of a golden calf.
Don't they melt down the calf as well?
And the people are still today like, well, the Bible's a great story. You know, it's just, what Bible did you read that I didn't read?
Just on that Exodus point, I was saying this yesterday to Derek from Myth Vision. So, and it's like the guards at the tomb. So Matthew has his guards at the tomb, and the guards are the only eyewitnesses of Jesus' resurrection, right? And they don't believe in Jesus. So they see Jesus resurrected, and then they run back to the Sanhedrin. They get paid a couple of shekels to lie about what they've seen, and then they run away, and that's the end of them. They're like, hang on, they've literally just seen God resurrected. And yet they're like, yeah, no, I'm not bothered.
For a few shekels.
They fell down as if dead, and then they got back up again, and then they went, yeah, bribe me to keep shut. That's fine. See you later. So, and I say this is really like the Exodus account. So in the Exodus account, you have the entire nation of Egypt getting punished and screwed over by God, right? As God showing his strength and power over the Pharaoh and over the nation of Egypt and over the army and all this, right? You would think if you had actual God appearing and doing all these crazy things through pillars of fire and clouds and plagues, right? You would think some of the Egyptians would probably go, oh, do you know what? I think this God might exist. But instead, none of them believe in God. None of them believe in Yahweh. And Judaism doesn't exist in Egypt until diaspora Jews moved there like several thousand years later. Like they've just been punished overtly, disgustingly by God, like screwing them over in a power show to say, I am the God that exists. I am the God. And yet none of the Egyptians, they've just lost all their cattle. They've lost their firstborn. They've lost their entire army. And yet they go, oh, no, I don't think I bother. I think I'll continue believing in my pagan Egyptian gods, thanks. Give me Osiris any day. But you've just literally had your children killed by actual God. Yeah, but Osiris.
Right. So then this is funny because I'm going to get a little tiny bit personal here. A kid, someone I grew up with, who I'd known since kindergarten, who I was, believe it or not, was in the same church with. This was like a couple of years ago, not even that long ago. And as I'm leaving, as I'm deconverting, he's the only one I'm talking to, right? Because you can't go to the church and talk about these things. You can't be like, listen, there's a story about Mithra, December 25th. There's a story about Osiris, he resurrected. You can't do that. It's just not going to happen. Even if you wanted to, you just, it's something, there's some blockage. Like it's hard to do that, right? But I had this one friend that I've known forever, and I'm showing him my research as I'm going along. He's getting really annoyed. So he ended up blocking me, by the way, because of this. But one of the things I said to him was, I said, doesn't this not make any sense that the Pharisees and the Sadducees literally watched all these miracles, and they watched this guy die, and zombies raised out from the ground? In the book of Matthew, it says when Jesus died, when he gave up the ghost, the whole sky turned black. This was at noon. The whole sky turned black. Zombies came out of the graves and started walking the streets of Jerusalem. So I said to him, isn't it a little odd to you that the Jews saw all this happen and still reject him? And he goes, you know what he said to me? Well, they're wicked in their hearts. They're evil. I go, what? I go, are you fucking kidding me? The whole Old Testament, everything that they say and do, you're like, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh, Jeremiah is the real deal. Isaiah, love Isaiah. Ezekiel, oh yeah, I love Ezekiel. But then all of a sudden, when it gets to the New Testament, they're all evil and wicked, and you don't like them.
But that's how they actually justify like the Exodus happening. Like all of those Egyptian people were evil. Really, all of them? Like the kids that had only just been the newborns. How about the cows? Were they evil?
It's such a childish. It's such a childish way to look at things. To say they're all evil and wicked because they don't agree with me.
I want to pick up on what you said. Do you mind if I read you a quote? It's from my resurrection book, but actually I'm quoting someone else who is exactly what you were just talking about, right? So imagine you're the Pharisees who are running Jerusalem at the time when the resurrection happens, right? And you've got all this earthquakes, you've got all this stuff going on, you've got the veil being torn, and you've got your guards have just gone away. Right, that you paid them to stand by the tomb. They've come back and said, we have literally seen God resurrected, right? So you are the Pharisees, okay? So, and this is from the Conversational Atheist blog. These soldiers allegedly have front row seats to the most important and impressive miracle of all time. They don't, however, start worshipping the obvious God-man whose death and resurrection bring about earthquakes, darkness in the middle of the days, and angels descending from heaven. Instead, they return to the priests that sent them to guard this impostor's tomb and tell them everything that had happened. These priests are now in quite a situation. They had to deal with all the stresses of organizing the Passover, and then they had to deal with this rabble-rousing Jesus character. And as soon as they get Jesus sentenced to death, the trouble really begins. There was an earthquake, the temple curtain being ripped from ceiling to the floor, darkness that covered all the land, and now another earthquake. On top of that, there are all these reports of all kinds of dead saints that are walking around today. And on top of it, and to top it all off, the guards and that the priests themselves had posted to guard the tomb come running back, terrified, telling them, hey, that guy you just sent to death for falsely proclaiming to be sent by God, it turns out he is God. We were there guarding the place. Earthquake happens. Angels comes blazing in from the sky, rolls away the stone. Jesus came back to life, just like he said it would happen. At this point, if you don't know how the story goes in Matthew, you might guess that the soldiers and priests became Christians and followed Jesus for the rest of their days. You'd be wrong.
Wow. Well,
and it's just beautifully put. You got all this crazy stuff going on, just like the Egyptians. You got all this mental stuff. You got the Pharisees organizing Passover, sentencing this guy to death for claiming he's God. Then you have earthquake as he dies, darkness. You got zombies parading around Jerusalem. Then you guard his tomb, and then the guards come back and say he literally just rose back to life again. I think he's the Messiah or God, right? And as the Pharisees, you go, who are running the show in Jerusalem, you go, all right, let's just forget about it.
Yeah.
Just like, whatever.
Let's cover this up.
Let's just carry on Sanhedrining away and just, Yeah. It's just like, then it doesn't make sense. Nothing makes sense. Right?
Makes zero sense. The
But there you go.
last thing I want to touch on, and because this sort of all ties into this will tie everything together, is we live in a world now where we know a lot more than people did 100 years ago, let alone 2,000 years ago when this was all getting written down. And we know a lot about the universe, how old the universe is. We know a lot about physics, and which leads educational, it leads education to say, no more teaching about God. Let's teach the real stuff, which is great, which is where we should be going. And it pisses off a lot of Christians, evangelicals in particular. But this is what really gets me. And let's say this. You'll hear a lot of Christian apologists today in 2021 using deist arguments to back up a creation model. They'll say, well, we don't know what happened before the Big Bang. And they'll say all this crazy stuff. Quantum entanglement means that two particles or two atoms in one side of the universe can be attached to another part of the universe, which means the Son and the Father, therefore Bible. They always do this. They'll take a deist argument, and even the deist argument is flawed. They'll take the deist argument and they'll apply it to their creationist argument, but then they'll go back to therefore Bible. It's like, you can't do that. Either the Bible's true completely, either the Bible's 100% true, or you're a deist, which you're not, or you can't use any. You can't put the two together. It's unfair.
I think that the problem is you've got only several.
Look who just popped in.
Look there now. You boys are going to hell. You better get your stuff together, because the good Lord's going to kick you in the boots when you come walking around the mountain when she comes. You know what I mean?
Sorry, Jonathan, to cut you off, but this was just too good.
Man, I thought we were just talking about how Satan doesn't exist, and it turns out
he's the devil. The devil votes Democrat. Okay, I've seen it.
Turns out he's driving.
Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna make this a highlight.
I'm in the neighborhood. Look, I gotta get off. I just wanted to pop on and let you guys know I love you. Keep up the good work, and see you in hell.
Yeah.
All right, dude.
Take it easy.
That's awesome.
Brilliant.
So back to what you were saying.
Yeah. So I was just saying that basically when you have the Bible, right, there's only a few ways of seeing it. Either it's all historically and theologically true, or if you get certain things like certain aspects of the nativity, someone like Raymond Brown, a Catholic exegete, might say it's not historically true, but it's still theologically true. I would contest that you can't have theology without history, so you've got nothing to hang it on. But okay, you say that you might say something like the Book of Job is symbolic, it's theological, it's not historical, right? It's telling us a theological truth. But the problem is, if you get to that stage, then actually you can just start making anything up and putting it in the Bible, because you're just making up stories. Or you get to this point where you're like, it's not historically true and it has no theological truth, in which case is nothing, whatever. And so the Christians obviously don't want to get to that last stage. That's your skeptic stage, where you're like, well, this is I could at best glean a bit of a moral lesson off this, in the same way that I could off any book I read, but essentially this is neither historically nor theologically true. So they can't get to that stage because it all falls apart then. So therefore, if everything in the Bible needs to be somehow speak some kind of truth. So you're looking around the world, seeing how you can make the Bible fit to the other truths that you're finding about the world. But the problem is, God keeps getting pushed into these smaller and smaller areas. So in the old days, 2,000 years ago, God explained thunder and lightning and this and that and all this stuff that you didn't know, because you didn't know much. And everything you didn't know, God over gaps. But then as we start expanding our knowledge, God is pushed further and further and further back behind that mountain, behind there, over there, until now, as God becomes this omni-God, is like an abstraction. God exists outside of the universe. God is no longer even behind the mountain or over the seas or in the sky. God is not even in the universe. God is this abstract idea that exists outside the universe that flicked that first domino. and started the universe. So there's your deistic understanding of God, this abstract thing. Then you try and make that fit with your idea of the God getting interested in humanity in the Bible. And you're like, okay, how does this abstract idea? So it needs to have some kind of human form. And then you're just cobbling together an understanding of God. After 2,000 years of taking God out of the universe, you then have to admit that it started in the universe in Israel, literally in a particular place. Right. It wasn't even called Israel then. So God was a Canaanite God that walked around and was a storm god and did all this stuff. We've abstracted him from there out of the universe. But if I'm still going to believe the Bible has some kind of truth to it, I need to put him back into the Bible, into the universe. And here I've got this just contradiction, this tension between this abstract philosophical God and a parochial human God placed in history.
Yeah, and I think the biggest error that, in hindsight, with what they really screwed up on was the genealogy thing. By making a genealogy that you can trace Adam all the way down to Jesus, screwed everything up for them, because now you can't have a deist argument, because now you have to admit we can date the time of Adam to 6,000 years ago. Okay, that's way deep into it. That's the future. Compared to the timeline of the universe, that's right now. Like, that's 5 seconds ago. So it's like, you want to go with the Big Bangs and say that this whole Big Bang is explained by the 7-day creation theory. But then how do we get from day 6 or whatever, day 6 when Adam was it day 6 or day 7, he rests, and 6 he created Adam and Eve. Okay, so how do you go from day 6 being the day Adam was created to 4,000 BC? What happened in between? You're saying, okay, then they point to Peter. Well, Peter says a day is like 1,000 years to the Lord. Well, that's a lot longer than 1,000 years. That's billions of years. So which one is it?
But it doesn't marry, which is why the only way you can make it work is by being a real liberal kind of, let's interpret this symbolically, and then it all just becomes...
Or you go the other route, you turn it around and you go full-blown flat earth model. The NASA's lying. This is all conspiracy by Satan.
Yeah,
none of this is true.
But then it's like Satan's planting fossils and all this stuff. But then you have to say, well, Satan's doing that because God wants it, and then it yields back to this where we started, which brings
us back to the beginning of our conversation. Is why does Satan have so much power, and does Satan more power? Why is Satan winning over God?
Yeah. And of course, Satan isn't, because Satan is just doing whatever God wants.
Which means God wants you to be an idiot and think there's false.
Yeah.
So there you go. We're back to square one.
And here's something to leave you with as well, Neil. So this is something to think about. You know The Matrix, the film The Matrix?
Yeah.
So it's based on Descartes' evil demon thought experiment. So Descartes said, as a philosopher, he said, I want to work out what we can know. So he stripped everything back to saying, and he said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. So the thinking entity is the only thing I can be 100% sure of. I can only be sure that I exist. Everything else, there's a small percentage chance that it is a figment of my imagination. It's been put into my brain by the Matrix, by an evil demon, whatever, right? What's really interesting about this, so we talk about how God is omniscient, right? He has perfect 100% indubitable knowledge about everything. But actually he can't, because God is just as susceptible to the Matrix argument as humans are. Right. So God could not know that he wasn't himself a brain in a vat or in the Matrix, or having another level of another God above him, putting things, literally a mind cannot know that they are not having everything fed to them. You might think you're the necessary entity existing in all possible worlds, but you could be being fooled by another higher level, and it's turtles all the way up, right? So you could then have another God above that God that could be feeding everything into that God, but then that God wouldn't know.
He doesn't know it exists, and his lack of faith gets him doomed, because he doesn't know. He's a skeptic. There's no God above me.
So this is not to say that all those levels of gods exist. What it is to say is that God can't know 100% that God is the necessary God, that there isn't another God above him. So it's just playing around with the idea of what omniscience is, really. It's like, can God know that he is actually the ultimate God? He can't even know that.
Wow.
This is quite an interesting thing.
This would make a good dark matter episode. You ever seen that YouTube channel, Dark Matter?
No, I've heard of it. But...
They do cartoons about like the insanity of the Bible. That they make episodes that are like very, very meta like that. Where it's, I think they might actually have an episode of God having a God, but like that would be a good one right there. It's like all of a sudden, let's like this would be a good episode, right? Is like, so everything's true. Let's say the Bible's 100% true, and you and I are just we're doomed. We're skeptics, and we wind up in hell, right? All of a sudden, trillions of years goes by. We're in hell. All the believers are in heaven. All of a sudden, boom! In a flash of an instant, we're in another realm, and there's a different God above that God, and that God gets judged for not believing in that God.
Yeah. That God ends up in hell with us.
Right. I didn't believe in God, so I'm here.
It's like, damn, what am I doing? I put you here, and I'm here with you because
and we're like, what did you do? What did you do, God? Well, I didn't believe in the God above me.
I thought I was the only one.
Welcome to the club. That'd be good. All right. Well, plug your stuff right now. Go ahead.
So I've got a blog at A Tippling Philosopher, which is on the Patheos Non-Religious channel. I have written a ton of books. One of my latest ones, it's not actually my latest one anymore, The Resurrection, A Critical Examination of the Easter Story. I've got a book just out called Why I Am Atheist and Not a Theist, which I think is really clever.
Right.
Why I'm atheist, not atheist. And that's really cool. And I'm just writing a book on the Exodus, really similar to that. And I'm also writing a book on loads of arguments against the existence of God, which is all the stuff we're talking about, which is why it's quite relevant for me at the moment, because I'm literally writing about them. So
great stuff too, by the way. I recommend it. And I will put the links in the comment section and in the description for anyone who wants to just go on, click it real quick.
Yeah.
And, go ahead.
I was just say, come and join my YouTube channel as well. Is with about 10 other people. So.
Yeah, no, you're getting there. You're getting like 600, 700 right now.
Yeah, 600 something. So
before you know it, because I was just at that at where you're at right now 3 months ago.
Yeah,
I'm at 4,000. As soon as you hit that 1K, you're just gonna see it snowball because you have good content, and I would follow you. I would just keep going. You're gonna be fine, and I'll help. I'll do whatever I can to keep you pushing your stuff out there. But it's worth anyone watching this. It's worth it. It's good stuff on that channel. Go and check it out. Subscribe, and you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over